Walmart was 35% of our business at one point, and we lost them. It was devastating to us as a company. That happened before we sold. But so diversifying your customer stream, if you find that one customer is calling, and the cringe factor like you're talking about, because if we lose, we have to make this person happy, or if we lose it, a third of the people in this company are going away, like that will keep you up at night. That will cause some sleepless nights.
Yeah. So in this thing, I think we want to kind of dive into the subject of kind of the paradigm. And if you haven't seen where we talk about like how much my company is worth, like it's worth, I would watch that before this.
Okay.
Like get some idea of that.
Sure.
But kind of that next step, or maybe the flip side of looking at it, is what can I do to my company to increase its value?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of the flip side to the valuation, so that's important. We looked at a company, and it's still in the transition, so I'll try not to expose who it is, but
we'll bleep it out if you do.
You're going to try to trick me into exposing this company. It's not going to happen. So I looked at the company, and it was undesirable to us. It was approximately, I thought it was a good company.
Yeah.
But the deciders in our company were like, we don't want it, because they were less than 10% profit margin. Mm-hmm. And they were looking for greater than 10%. So it was a $1.2 million company that was running at 6 or 7% profit margin, which is not great. You know, that's the guy has a job, not a company. Mm-hmm. And looked over all the numbers, and after you go through 100 P&Ls, you start picking out patterns and all, and looking at the numbers, like everything on this makes sense. Like your insurance makes sense, your rent makes sense, like nothing's way off. Just your labor's high compared to your gross revenue. So you're underselling your jobs, like you need to raise your prices by like 20%. You're about 20 to 25% under what the market is charging for your services. So that happened to my dad's company, as a side note. Like they ran through the 90s, through the 80s, 90s, and then in the late 90s, they were still charging prices that they did in the late 80s. Well, the world had moved on, inflation had happened, but they hadn't in their mind. They were still like, a man day's worth $200. That's what we bill out at. So it was crippling their company. And this one too, that's what I looked at it and like, all your expense numbers make sense. You're underselling by about 25%. The guy's like, okay, thanks. You know, we're not going to buy your company. Walk away. Talk to him 6-7 months later, and he raised all his prices 25%. He's like, it's the most amazing thing. Like, I didn't lose a single customer. All of them were like, yeah, your prices were really good. Now these are in line with what we're seeing. Profit margin went through the roof. You know, this guy went from a 7% margin to a 25% margin. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, we're interested in his company. He got 50% more for his company than he would have, even if we would have bought it like 6 months prior. So some of those, that's just such an easy little tweak, is pricing has to be right for existing structure, and you have to know what it is and what a mandate is selling for, basically, in your area, and it's different in every area. And so finding your niche is important, because most people don't know who their most profitable customer or even who their most profitable service is. And so they don't know that that's what they should be growing. Like, it's thought of as kind of sexy to do high-rise work, right? That's like, wow, that's you're at the pinnacle when you're dropping off buildings. Here in Jacksonville, Florida, high-rise work is trash. Like, you can't make money at it. It sells for day rates that you can't keep a good guy and make a living at it. And so we were getting into high-rise cleaning, and we couldn't make any money at it. Well, there was other niche work, and I won't give all that company's trade secrets, but there was other niche work that was making 3 and 4 times the daily revenue per man that high-rise work was. So why would we grow high-rise work? And I think it's hard when you're in the weeds and you've always done something a certain way, but if someone can get into your books and get into your company and ask some basic questions, a lot of times you'll turn over some rocks and you'll find out what we're selling and marketing ourselves as isn't the best. It's not our best dollar. It's not our most profitable work. And so I think figuring that out, and there are business coaches, there are educators that help companies figure that out, looking at sitting down with a business analyst or someone that wants to buy your company and just having a conversation with them. Even if you don't want to sell it this year or next year, but going through that process and having those questions asked can open up the possibility that there are other ways to grow your business and grow your profit margin that might be sitting right underneath your nose.
I think it's really interesting that you bring that up about, analyzing. Companies don't take the time to look at customer analysis, and they don't look at the product analysis, at service analysis. I think that's one of the things that we always like to do with our consulting is go through a process of this.
Yeah.
And so like, just for example, I mean, it can be as simple as you build a spreadsheet.
Yep.
And you take the services that you offer and you break them down by percentage of revenue, percentage of cost.
Yeah.
You get your actual revenue and actual cost numbers for each one.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I mean, it seems so simple, right?
Yes.
But it's amazing what kind of picture that will paint.
Yes.
For how much resources you're committing to this versus how much profit it's creating, how much revenue it's creating, how much energy it's taking.
Yes.
To do that. There's a philosophy that we've always kind of talked with companies about, finding a sweet spot. And it's the spot between the right product, which is the product that makes sense for you.
Yeah.
The product that is something that you can scale. Because I think sometimes service businesses, it's very easy to fall into the rut of like, we kind of do this special thing for this customer and this special thing for that customer, and we kind of tweak something over here for that customer, but that's not very scalable, even if it's profitable.
Right.
And then the third part is understanding, what those customers will look like, and actually going down through your customers and looking at like which ones spend the money with you. And, if you took those top 10 clients, right, they're spending the money with you, and then you cross-reference that against a few categories. Where did you get them?
Yeah. Yes.
How do they do business with you?
Yes.
And then I think the one factor that we struggle with as business, because we like sales, they make us feel safe, is like, what's the cringe factor? When your company gets a call from that client, how do you feel about it? You're like, yeah, they're calling, they're my favorite client. Or you're like, oh my goodness, if they call me again. And I think a lot of times it's very easy for a business to have a client that's a good client, as in they do a lot of work, but they're cringeworthy.
You're
and
saying
it's like,
because they're demanding, or because it's
whatever
whatever.
They call you out 2 extra times every time you come out. They're the ones that call back, and they're like, well, I don't like this, and you didn't do this, but you feel like they give you a lot of business. You're constantly bending over backwards.
Yeah.
But it's those types of things, like the service that you think is something you want to sell because people want it, but you don't make any money on.
Yes.
Which is not a good business practice.
Right.
And then the client that you feel like gives you a lot of money, but literally runs the profit margin down because they run you around, or they stress you out.
Yeah.
They stress your team out, your employees out. Like, those are the kind of things that I think will really hinder a business from knowing how to lean into something that actually is growable.
Yes.
So I just some coloring in on like that thought, because I really liked your thought on that.
I absolutely agree. I think most people don't know their books. They don't know what's actually happening. They know they're going out and working hard and bidding jobs, and maybe they think they know their books, but they don't know what their best customer is. They don't know what their best customer type is. Or if they do know what their best customer type is, they're not marketing to that best customer type, because maybe you've gotten to $1 million and you have enough customers. But then how do you maybe you have enough customers and the phone's ringing, and so you're just taking what's coming at you, right? That could happen in the high-rise world, because the high-rise world in Jacksonville, if you could make $400 a man day with a guy hanging off a building, you're lucky. And it was just such lean margin. But the jobs are big. They're $10,000 or $20,000 jobs. And so it seems like if you made that sale, then the company was making more money. Where you might be offering another service that doesn't look as sexy or sound as sexy, but you're making $800 or $1,000 a man day. Then you're like, why wouldn't you be marketing, even if you're doing all of these services, even if you're still doing the high rise and that's bread and butter for you? Why wouldn't you be marketing your business to the ultimate customer, like the most profit margin? A lot of companies, including us, lots of times we weren't doing that. We were just taking the phone rang and that's the person you go serve.
Yeah, I think part of what does that is just we're caught up in the day-to-day or solving the problems
That's
that
true.
we've talked about in some of our other conversations. It's like, I'm solving this problem and that problem and this problem. When do I actually sit down and actually just spend some time doing some analysis? When do I spend time just digging through this to do that? And then I think the second part is that the psychology is we're measuring what comes in the door. Mm-hmm. We're measuring the money that comes in.
Right.
That's the easiest money to measure.
Right.
Right? The easiest money to measure is the income that comes in, but
as opposed to how do you measure something that's not measurable or not coming in?
Well, you're not taking as much time measuring what's going out the back door versus what's coming in the front door.
Right.
You know, it's like, well, there's money in the bank account.
Yep.
We got checks coming in.
Yep.
You know, the phone's ringing. My guys are busy.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that as a company you're making any money.
True.
But that's going to become really clear when somebody like you comes along and is looking at acquiring a company. You are going to take the time.
You better.
to measure those things. And so I think
Yeah.
But even if you just want to run a business that's like rewarding you for the risk you're taking in it, you owe it to yourself to take the time to do some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't mean to be preachy. Like, that's
I agree with
my
that.
intention.
And on the whole, what people can do, kind of back to the question you
Yeah.
posited initially, what can someone do? Sometimes getting an offer and having someone look at your books, even if you don't sell the company, they can pick out one or two or three things. People in this position that are acquiring companies, we are looking at, I don't know how many P&Ls, hundreds of P&Ls in a year's time. And so after you look at hundreds of P&Ls, you kind of know where insurance should be coming in. You kind of know where labor should be coming in. So you sit down and you kind of know where automobiles should be coming in. So you have basic metrics and percentages that companies should be. You sit down with the P&L that has a glaring mistake or two, you know it right away, like as soon as you're looking at it. And so you can have that meaningful discussion with an owner and say you might want to look at this cost or that cost. That information is very helpful to an owner to dig into that and right away have an identifier of something that might be off from the norm or off from a benchmark.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, in a lot of ways, you guys are kind of doing a checkup on the P&L. You're doing that review. And the best thing, I mean, the most valuable thing in the world is to do an assessment of like where things are. Yeah. And you guys can kind of offer that from a perspective of, valuation, like what it does look like to an outside person. You guys are unbiased. Yeah. There's no emotional attachment to anything that they're doing. It just is for the numbers.
Some people are worried that you're seeing their like exposed underbelly, but a P&L is a P&L. Like, I mean, there aren't that many secrets in the service. There are some trade secrets, but not a lot. And because of education and conventions and all this access to information, I guess the free information that's out there on the internet, you can learn most of the things you need to learn to make your company a better company. But having someone look at it and give that unbiased judgment of it is super helpful.
Are there kind of any other like kind of standard things? I mean, I think the first thing, just to recap, looking at your activities from a profitability standpoint is a real easy way, right? Because I mean, at the end of the day, it is measuring. Your net is what's creating the baseline for that value.
I think so.
No, but
isn't that the ultimate test on whether a company is succeeding? Is because companies are there to provide for their owners. Right?
If it's a for-profit company,
you would assume so.
I think that's the thing, but it's probably the last thing that owners really measure in the cycle of starting and growing a business. True profit is probably the last thing they get a grip on. Net profit, right?
Probably, yes.
Because even once a business seems to start doing good, usually by that point, people are using kind of the company's money to create owner benefits, and they're never really getting a true picture.
Yep.
So I know some of the other things we talked about when valuation was determined are processes, having a process-driven company.
Yeah.
What are some tips that you would give? I mean, you grew a sizable company. What are some tips you could give for a business owner that's like, how do I make my company more process-driven? What would I do?
I think just starting with that in mind, starting to build process or systems, even on the simple levels of how do the trucks get taken care of when they come in, or how do we train a guy. That's one of the hardest things about, I think, growing a company is recruiting and keeping talent and good people. And if you don't have a good system that's making them a good employee, then you're losing, all the energy to get those people. It's kind of a separate topic, but it's worth talking about. So the system of, if we bring someone in, how do we make them a good window washer in 2 months' time? How do we make them a good pressure washer in 2 months' time? Like, if you don't understand the process of how you take people through that, then there probably isn't a process, and there needs to be.
Yeah.
Or you're frustrated. You have a guy for 6 months or a year, and you're like, why doesn't he know how to wash your windows still? And you're like, well, did you ever train the guy, like what your system was and how to do that? And did you have a metric? We hung windows up on the outside of the building, and we were like, these windows should be cleaned in 60 seconds time. And when a guy comes in, it'll usually take him 2 minutes. And once he gets it to 90 seconds, well, he's going to get a pay raise bump. Once he gets these windows to 60 seconds, he's going to get another pay raise bump. So they had this metric to chase that when I get this to this level, then we know you've got that down.
Yeah.
And the same with each thing. And then for systemizing employee training, some people are good at teaching and others aren't. So knowing who's good at teaching in your company is really important. And then finding that person, and if you have a person who can kick out good window washers, you should always have a person next to that guy learning how to become a good window washer. That's how you're going to grow it. Like, you have to produce more good window washers or more good painters. So find the guy who can train, and then we would incentivize that guy. Like, every good window washer you have, because it takes his time, so it cuts down on his productivity and maybe the piece of what he gets paid. So he's like, okay, I'll take on new people and train them, but there has to be something you compensate that guy with. So we would give, I think back then we would give that guy $500 for every good window washer he kicked out into the company. So systemizing your training in some meaningful way, and then taking that into, and you do this in the coaching, take it into any meaningful way, whether it's your invoicing or your collections or any of the metrics that your vehicle maintenance, like each thing, breaking it down into the simple processes that are needed for that thing in a year's time, and then taking meaningful steps to get those processes in place.
I'm just going to make an assumption here.
Cool.
It's usually a safe thing to do,
right?
I think for a lot of people, that's a really big step if they're not used to doing it. Yeah. Where do I get started? How would you get, do you have and I would just love to hear, what, if you're like, I want to make a process, how do you do it? Do you do it and then write it down as you go? How did you like going about making a process if you didn't have one?
Yeah. So we've gone through different steps to do that. One is we had, 3 or 4 office personnel at that point, and we needed to figure out, what are all these people doing? What do they do in a day? So instead of us coming up with that process, we were handed them each a piece of paper, and we're like, before we write a scope of work for you, could you tell us mostly what you do here and what that looks like? And then you could look at each of these sheets and be like, okay, this is overlapped here, this is overlapped there. So you could start, it is an intimidating process, and you have to start somewhere. And I think back to the quote from Flint McLaughlin was priceless early on in the company, was to my brother and I, he said, you guys need to always be training yourself out of a job. So when you find yourself doing this routine thing, you find yourself at the same Chick-fil-A cleaning the same window, the same Monday morning at 7:30, like now you're just duplicating your steps, and you might love doing that, but if you're going to grow a company, you need to have someone beside you here that you're training to do that, and that you can hand that off to. And then you'll always find another job to do for yourself, growing another system. And then as you grow that other system, pull someone in, train them to do what you just learned how to do, and then do it again. So the mechanism of always training yourself out of a job is a really good mechanism to continue to grow system and train people in a company.
What do you think the best way is to transfer processes? Is it in a document? Is it just that hands-on kinesthetic? Because that's kind of what you're describing right now, is like, if I do it, then the next step is I'm going to bring the person to watch me do it, and then they can do it while I watch them, and then they can do it by themselves. Yeah.
That's a good question. I think it depends on the task. I think in the blue-collar world, kind of the hands-on world, historically it's been an apprentice and a master, right? And the apprentice mirrors the master, and it's hard to beat that model. Maybe the downside of that model is it's time consuming and you only have so many masters. So you get to the place where it's not just you're training yourself out of a job, but you've also built a system where the guys you trained also know their job now is to train themselves out of a job. And so you're building into the company and into your system and into your chemistry that anyone who wants to continue to grow needs to be bringing someone up to do their job so that they can then go to the next job. And so I'm a hands-on guy, and work side by side with people. Yeah. When we pulled in my replacement in sales, it's like, how do you book learn sales? Like, that's really tough, but come along with me. And that's what I did when I was a kid. Come along with me. Yeah. Sit by me. Experience this conversation. Yeah. And then it's not like you experience this conversation and you're learning, I'm showing you the best way to do everything in life. There's a piece of they're learning what I do, and then we'd go drive to the next sales meeting and we'd have a conversation and like, how did that look to you, to the apprentice? And then you'd get their feedback, and oftentimes they'd teach you a thing or two, like, well, when you said this, it came across this way. Is that what you meant? And you're like, oh no, like maybe it came across that way to the customer, and that's not what I meant. So it's this mutual. An apprentice and a master is not like lording over a person and I'm going to imprint who I am onto them. It's this dialogue kind of thing that happens that both people are making each other better, I think.
Yeah, I like that. Any last thoughts on things people can do to increase the value of their company?
That was the question we started out with.
Yeah, it was. I just want to make sure we return back to it.
Did we go too far off?
No, I don't think so. I think it was a good conversation. We talked about some actual tactical things people can be doing.
Yeah, so I think if you have a customer that's too heavy, we got in that place. Walmart was 35% of our business at one point, and we lost them. It was devastating to us as a company. That happened before we sold. But so diversifying your customer stream. If you find that one customer is calling and the cringe factor like you're talking about, because if we lose, we have to make this person happy, or if we lose it, a third of the people in this company are going away, like that will keep you up at night. That will cause some sleepless nights. It's not a healthy place for a company to be. So if you find yourself in that, you might want to of course you want to continue to serve that customer and serve them to the best of your ability, but you might want to get strategic about the money you're pulling in and diversify your revenue stream by marketing to other customers or similar customers, but other people.
That's good advice.
I think that's important.
That's a cringe fact. I wasn't really considering that when I said it, but that's a significant the clients that are so significant that when they call, you're like, I hope they're not calling to say this is it.
Yeah. Oh, and I think this is important to bring up. In your bookkeeping, a lot of people think this is another Flint McLaughlin moment I got to give him. So when we started 20 years ago, so I think we're out of the statute of limitations, there was a certain amount of cash paying customers that we pocketed the cash. And we were like, oh, we're $100, that didn't make it to the books.
Yeah.
That's a bad idea. No one can value you based on the $100 you put in your pocket. That's not a real number. And someone that comes in has to see real books. So our pastor early on, like a year into the business, was like, stop doing this. Stop having two sets of metrics. Stop making some money in cash on the side and some money that's legal. Put it all legal. You'll get all your depreciation. You'll get your full valuation if you ever go to sell this thing. And that was really important for one, to have clean books, because the integrity part of it is an important part of that too. Like being honest on your taxes and reporting and being a part of the system. But this is a way bigger issue than we may as Americans care to admit. Because I was talking to our Sherwin-Williams rep, how many painting companies are in Jacksonville. He was like, on the books or off the books? I'm like, I don't care. It's got to be pretty similar. He's like, it's not similar at all. Like, in Jacksonville, there are 750 painting companies. This was 10 years ago, on the books. We have 1,500 customers, painting contractors. That means 50% of the people were running their finances under the table. That's a big number, right? That's a lot of people who are just doing cash deals.
Insane.
It was insane to me. I was like, that's crazy. Like, I would have thought maybe 10% or off. It's not. 50%. So that's a lot of tax revenue for one that's not getting. And if everyone was, we could go off on the whole tax. And the tax code's a stinking mess. And it's not what it should be. But despite that, a valuable thing, if you want to grow a business and you want to sell it, you need to have real books. You need to have all your money on the table, and then you really can see your real metrics. You know what's coming in, you know what's going out and where it's going out to. You know the real profit margin. Someone else who's looking at it, they can look at that and say, yeah, like this is all here. I can see it. We can visually see it. You can't put a P&L in front of someone and then tell them, well, I made $100,000 in cash that's not showing here, but they can't value that. For one, they already know you're not necessarily a straight shooter because you've been lying on your books the whole time. Number two, they've got to discount whatever you're saying that you're making in cash on the side. They've got to discount that by a certain number because nothing's verifiable. And these deals, you go to a bank and borrow the money to buy the company. The bank's looking at real numbers. They're looking at a real P&L. So that's an important part. To add value to your company, have clean books and do it by the book.
I had a conversation with a business owner. I was at a conference.
Okay.
I think this was, a couple of years ago. And they were talking about what they had gone through. They decided they wanted to build a home. And they had a business that was, doing well.
Yeah.
But they were expensing everything.
Yeah.
And getting their profit and their income as low as possible every year.
Sure.
Which I grew up around that.
Sure.
I grew up around that mindset, right?
Yeah.
Pay as little taxes as possible.
Yeah.
Well, the bank looked at them and were like, as far as we're concerned, you don't make any money.
Yeah. You're broke.
You're broke. And so it took them I think it was 2 or 3 years of going back through of living out doing their books clean.
Clean them, yeah.
And I'm not advocating one way or another. Should you borrow money for homes or whatever? That's a whole other discussion, right?
Sure.
What you borrow money for versus what you don't. But our financial system works by a certain set of rules.
That's right.
And in the long run, you're only hurting yourself if you try to not play by those rules.
Yeah.
And I think you can kind of even sum up what you said in another, adage. If you want to have a business that has value, you start to treat your business like a business. And if you treat it like a business, it's going to have a proper business entity. It's going to have proper books. Yeah. And you're going to learn that it's not like there's not tax advantages that businesses have as entities. You just need to learn to do them right so that it's not a detriment to you down the road.
That's right.
And then the integrity aspect, of course.
Yeah, and Flint was like, if you do it any other way other than all above board, you're always going to be looking over your shoulder, worried about when am I going to get caught. And then secondly, find me a business system, find me someone that's operated that way in 20 years, that's ahead of the game. Like, Maybe there might be some guys that have a pocket full of, they've got a pile of money under their mattress, but as a general rule, I don't think it's the best way to grow a business. I can't see that formula succeeds ultimately.
You know, one of the clients that that we had in marketing, do you know the guys from Peer Payments?
I know the name.
Anyway, so they're payment processor, right? Okay. So they do like no fee processing.
Yeah.
And they've really wanted to bring that into the pressure washing space. And so I was talking to another gentleman, Ron, which people may know who I'm talking about, may not, doesn't matter. Yeah. And I was talking to him about the spread, and he was having this conversation with me. He said, well, the truth is, and he knows thousands of house cleaners.
Yeah.
He said, here's the truth. He said, unfortunately, when you look at the spectrum of people washing houses, he said there's a whole lot of them that are willing to take a 20% discount to get cash.
Right. Like, how did that benefit you?
And he's like, so they're not really interested in no fee processing because as far as they're concerned, they just want money under the table.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have to, I'm just adding to your point that I think it's very prevalent in the home service. It's like, there's something like, I've got paid under the table. I've got one over on the system. And I know people like that, but it's not really doing you any favors. So
it's not. And then to your point, you'll go to a customer's house and you'll give them a quote. It's $500 to do your house. And they're like, well, what's the cash price?
Yeah.
And like, that's $500 to do your house. And they're like, no, but if I give you $400, like, you don't have to pay tax. And you're like, $400 that I don't have to pay taxes is the same as $500 that I do have to pay taxes. So why don't you just give me the $500 and I'll pay my taxes? You're not benefiting me. You're benefiting you.
Yes. Yes.
And then to the point of selling a company, I've lost all that $500 in the sale of the company because someone that comes to buy me, they don't care that I pocketed $400. That's meaningless to them. They care what I made on paper or to buy a house. To your point of buying a house, you think you're beating the system, but you're not. The system's beating you.
It's absolutely true. Well, I think this has been a really good. I've enjoyed this.
Likewise.
So I think this is a really good probably place to wrap this up, and we'll come back and we'll hit the next question on it.
Sounds good.
Right.
Yep.